Hello and welcome. In this lecture, I will discuss about the life, works and political philosophy of Saint Thomas Aquinas. Saint Thomas Aquinas was born in 1225 AD into a highly noble and influential family in Aquino, a small town near Naples in Italy. His father Landulf was Count of Aquino. Theodora, his mother, was Countess of Tiano. The family was related to the Emperor Henry VI and Frederick II and to the kings of Aragon, France and Castile. His formal education began in 1230 as an oblate at the Benedictine monastery of Monte Cassino. In 1245, despite great opposition from his family, he became a member of the Dominican order. Later, he went to the University of Paris to study under the famous German theologian Albert Magnus, who is considered as one of the greatest scholars of Aristotle in the Western world. Between 1252 and 1256 AD, in partial completion of his master's degree in theology, he compiled the treatise on the sentences of Peter Lombard, which was later included in the curriculum of medieval university education. After completing his master's degree in 1256, he was awarded a license to teach. He spent last 18 years of his life in teaching and writing at Paris, Naples, Orvieto, Viterbo and Rome. His Summa Contra Gentiles, a manual for missionaries, was completed at Orvieto in 1264. It was at the University of Paris that he wrote 12 commentaries on the works of Aristotle, including the Ethics and Politics. He began the Summa Theologica at Rome in 1266 and worked on it until forced by ill health to desist in 1273. It is a remarkable fact that he ceased work on the Summa because of some mystical experience while he was saying Mass in a church. Shortly afterwards, he died at a very young age on 7th March 1274. He was canonized by Pope John XXII in 1323. His philosophy began its rise to prestige 2 centuries later in 1567 when Pope Pius V proclaimed Saint Thomas Aquinas a doctor of the Church. His philosophy met the needs of the Church in the late medieval period when new institutions were emerging to challenge the supremacy of Church. The virtually exclusive place occupied by Thomist doctrine in Catholic philosophical education during most of the 20th century is due to the encyclical issued on 4th August 1879 by Pope Leo XIII, which recommended the work of Saint Thomas as an antidote to the threat of liberal thought in the Church. It unequivocally said, "Let carefully chosen teachers strive to implant the doctrine of Saint Thomas Aquinas in the minds of students and set forth clearly his soundness and excellence over others. Let the universities illustrate and defend this doctrine and use it for the refutation of prevailing errors." His philosophy is still influential in the Catholic Church, and he is generally recognized as the greatest thinker Catholicism ever produced. The 13th century was a period of extraordinary religious and intellectual movement. The Franciscan and Dominican orders were in their early developmental phase. The universities of Paris, Bologna, Oxford and Naples were beginning to flourish. It was really a revolutionary era of synthesizing knowledge and philosophy with theology. It was the golden period of scholasticism, which as a philosophy of life was all comprehensive of moral, ethical, theological, social, political, and economic domains. The scholasticism of 13th century represented an attempt to reconcile faith and reason, Hellenism and clericalism, so as to bring about a unification of all knowledge. Moreover, it was the time when the works of Aristotle became available for the first time in Europe in Latin translations. As the works of Aristotle found their way through Arab scholars, initially the church resisted and condemned Aristotelian propositions, but it could not prevent the revival of Aristotle's secular philosophy. Under such compelling circumstances, the widely accepted extreme theocratic views of St. Augustine began to be increasingly challenged. The new institutions such as universities, independent towns, craftsmen's guilds were beginning to grow and assert their autonomy. Aristotle's thought fit well with this new populism because it legitimized the entire realm of politics as something natural to human beings and necessary to their complete development. Thus, the profound intellectual currents of the Middle Ages, such as universalism, scholasticism, and Aristotelianism, provided a stimulating environment to St. Thomas Aquinas to be the best exponent of medieval political thought in synthesizing the classical with the Christian thought. St. Thomas was a theologian philosopher. In his theology, he was a devout Christian, and philosophically, he subscribed to the views of Aristotle. The primary influence in the works of St. Thomas Aquinas is that of Christian theology. He devoted his entire life to a thorough study of Scripture and was a true believer in Christianity. His philosophical discourses are conditioned by his religious views, insofar as he is primarily a theologian philosopher. For St. Thomas, theological discourse begins with what God has revealed about the world, and the world is understood in that light. Many of the questions that can be raised philosophically are such that the believer already has the answers to them from his religious faith. Thus, according to St. Thomas, the inquiries in which the believer who also philosophizes will often indicate his religious interests. Religion is not a system of revelation alone. A large part of religious knowledge is based on rational deliberation, and many of the claims of religion could be approached through rational argument. He viewed human wisdom as structured like a pyramid, with the science of ethics and politics at its base, with philosophy above, and theology at its apex. In the realm of philosophy, St. Thomas was greatly influenced by Aristotle. It was at the University of Paris, under the tutelage of Albert Magnus, that St. Thomas was introduced to the works of Aristotle. Aristotle's works had fallen into disarray because the Catholic Church, allied with Neoplatonism, had followed a deliberate policy of sidelining them. Fortunately, Aristotle's works were safeguarded by Muslim scholars in Spain that had become the repository of classical culture and learning. As the study of Aristotle was for many years the province of Arab commentators, prominent among them being Avicenna and Averroes, not surprisingly, the Church regarded the recovery of Aristotle with hostility. The interpretations of Averroes were perceived as being particularly at odds with the fundamentals of Christianity. Repeated ecclesiastical censures culminated in 1270 when 13 Aristotelian propositions were condemned as heretical. Therefore, almost the whole of St. Thomas's professional life was passed in an atmosphere of ecclesiastical hostility towards Aristotle. Despite this atmosphere, St. Thomas strongly believed that it was possible to reconcile the teachings of Aristotle with those of the Church. St. Thomas was convinced that Aristotle had carried the philosophical investigation as far as it can go without the advantage of divine revelation. If Aristotle's conclusions are divested of error and supplemented by revealed truth, the resulting synthesis of reason and revelation will yield an intellectually complete system. He diligently wrote as many as 12 commentaries on Aristotle between 1269 and 1272 and tried to assimilate many of Aristotle's arguments into the teachings of Christianity. In his most methodical work on kingship, St. Thomas follows the politics of Aristotle. He is in agreement with the central theme of Aristotle's philosophy that man is a social being and the state is natural to man. He embodies Aristotle's theory of state in his general theory of laws and agrees with Aristotle that law is identical with reason and that the best government is the one which is based on virtue. Thus, while rejecting Augustinian views of state, St. Thomas successfully infused Aristotle's naturalism with Christian spiritualism. St. Thomas is said to have Christianized Aristotle. His political thought departs fundamentally from the Platonist and Augustinian orientation of earlier generations. In this sense, St. Thomas represents a turning point in the history of political thought. St. Thomas Aquinas was a prolific writer, beginning with his commentary on Peter Lombard's sentences in the year 1252 till the last days of his life in 1274. He compiled numerous works. The Summa Theologica is the greatest work of Thomas Aquinas. Written between 1265 and 1273 in 3 parts, it is a systematic presentation of his views. Intended as a manual of theology for beginners, it is the most influential compendium of all the main teachings of Catholic Church. The Summa Theologica, in a cyclical order, provides in its 3 parts an outline of understanding God and His creation. The first part of Summa deals with God and His creation, which reaches its perfection in man. In it, he gives 5 proofs for God's existence and the doctrine that God governs the world as the universal first cause. Teleologically, there are varying perfections of varying degrees throughout the universe. These degrees assume the existence of an ultimate standard of perfection. Therefore, perfection must have a pinnacle. This pinnacle, according to St. Thomas Aquinas, is God. Since God is the first cause of everything, He is the cause of even the free acts of men through predestination. In every work of God, both justice and mercy are united, and His justice always presupposes His mercy, since He owes no one anything and gives more bountifully than is due. The second part of Summa is about ethics. Its theme is man striving after the highest end, which is God, through a chain of acts of will based on reason. Faith and reason together could guide the human mind in its desire for God and for truthful knowledge about the world. The last part of the Summa is on Jesus Christ. In it, he shows how Jesus Christ not only offers salvation but also represents return of creation to God through man. For St. Thomas, the way which leads to God is Christ, and the sacraments are the instruments through which this process takes place. This cyclical process can be shown in the illustration. St. Thomas left Summa Theologica mysteriously unfinished. It was due to a mystical experience during a Mass in 1273 that St. Thomas abruptly abandoned the work and it remained unfinished. St. Thomas did not talk much about that mystical experience, but only said that all I have written seems as straw compared to what I have experienced. A few months later, he died at a very young age. On kingship, on the government of princes, is his only exclusive political work. As is evident from the preface, it was written to the king of Cyprus. It seemed to me a highly appropriate offering that for a king I should write a book on kingship, in which, so far as my ability permits, I should carefully expound both the origin of kingly government and the things which pertain to the office of a king. In this work, St. Thomas discusses his classification of government and identifies the characteristics of the good and the bad forms of the governments. He believes that kingship is the best form of government and tyranny is the worst and the most unjust form of government. Most of the political philosophy of St. Thomas Aquinas emerged incidentally during the theological and philosophical discussions in the Summa Theologica. Just as St. Augustine made a unique contribution by combining Christian faith with elements of Platonic philosophy, St. Thomas Aquinas similarly combined Christian belief with the thought of Aristotle. The successful synthesis of knowledge, reason, and faith equips St. Thomas to forge a new kind of political philosophy because it lacks Augustine's stringent insistence on the unworthiness of this world and its ends. Thus, as a turning point in the later Middle Ages, the politics and political speculation once again assumed importance as it had in the classical times. St. Thomas describes reason, not sin, to be the defining characteristics of politics. He believes that God has implanted reason in human beings, and when people follow the dictates of reason in their social and political relationship with others, their behavior involves both a natural and a spiritual dimension. By uniting reason with nature and spirit, St. Thomas identifies compatibility between politics and spirituality. Consequently, he was successful in integrating theology with rediscovered views of Aristotle to make politics a benign and worthwhile activity from a Christian perspective. In this way, he found a means to justify the existence of state, government, and the law. St. Thomas believes that man is a social and political animal whose reason dictates him to live in association with others. Since man, unlike other animals, is not provided with a coat of fur as protection and sharp claws, horns, and teeth as armor, he is compensated by nature with the gift of reason. Social and political activity becomes necessary and good. Because reason alone cannot fulfill all human needs, political rule is conducive to human welfare and not an aspect of human sin, as was propounded earlier by St. Augustine in his Tea of God. So, like Aristotle, St. Thomas also reaches the same conclusion teleologically, that state is natural to man and its end is realization of good in a virtuous life. State should be organized upon justice and that the best should rule under the constraint of law. This argument leads St. Thomas to identify the best government. According to St. Thomas, the source of all political authority is God. It is from God that legitimate authority to govern passes on to the whole community. The people under God are sovereign and may delegate their authority to a monarchical, aristocratic, or republican government. St. Thomas, while following Aristotle in using both quantitative and qualitative criteria, concluded that governments can be good or bad. The main object of the government was to promote virtue among men to enable them to achieve eternal salvation. A government was good or bad according to the realization or otherwise of this objective. St. Thomas Aquinas preferred monarchy over other types of government. Since the universe is governed by one God, St. Thomas finds it a clear model of the best government. Those things are best which are natural, for in every case, nature operates for the best, and in nature, government is also of one omnipotent God. Thus, according to Thomas Aquinas, monarchy was the best form because it gave to the state important advantages of unity and regularity, analogous to divine rule. But monarchs are to rule justly for the common good and must not aim for personal wealth or power. So, monarchy may degenerate into tyranny, which is the worst form of government, but experience shows that it is actually the rule of many that more frequently descends into tyranny. St. Thomas argued that men have right to resist government and its law if it is oppressive in the sense that it contravenes natural law. Moreover, the ruler cannot claim authority in the matters of religion. The king had the power of organizing the secular functions of the state only. The Pope, possessing authority with regard to spiritual things, must therefore be obeyed by everyone, including the temporal rulers, so that within the limits of legitimacy, it is necessary that the division between church and state be upheld, in that the former possessing the authority of the eternal law, the later the authority over civil law. Apparently, it was this argument that led St. Thomas to present his classification of law. St. Thomas Aquinas, through his classification of law, tried to connect God, nature and man in a rational unity. According to him, universe represents a rational unity which is governed by a system of interrelated schemes of laws. As such, same principles operate in the regulation of human society as they did in other levels of universe. Both human society and the universe are governed by reason, divine or human. Reason, governing 4 different levels of universe, manifests in 4 corresponding types of laws, which are eternal, divine, natural and human. Eternal law is reason, existing in the mind of God, by which the whole universe is governed. This law regulates the heavenly and earthly spheres, including all animate and inanimate worlds. It is beyond the comprehension of ordinary human beings. It's not contrary to human reason, but human reason is too imperfect to be able to comprehend it. Divine law is a special category of eternal law. It is the commandment of God in Scripture. Divine law is a gift of God's grace to His chosen people rather than a discovery of human reason. St. Thomas believed that revelation added to human reason instead of destroying it. As a devout Christian, he strongly held that reason and faith are complementary. So, divine law, when understood properly and correctly by humans, manifests as natural law. Natural law is a reflection of divine reason in human beings. It is reflected in the natural inclination of men to live together in society, to preserve their lives, to beget children and nourish them, to seek good and avoid evil, etc. The reason of man helps him to evolve certain good principles of conduct through his innate knowledge of what is good or bad. And these general principles form the body of natural law. Since human reason is imperfect and can grasp only certain general principles of natural law, a more comprehensive body of law is necessary for man's guidance and regulation. Hence, there is human law. Human law is derived from natural law. It is subordinate and valid only if it does not conflict with natural law. It is a positive law and is subdivided into law of nations and civil law. Aquinas defines civil law as an ordinance of human reason for the common good promulgated by one who has care of the community. As an ordinance for the common good, human law has the following attributes. It is a standard rule of human action based on reason. The end of law being common happiness, it is always ordained for common good. Since it is ordained for common good, it is created by reason of the multitude or by the reason of the king acting for the multitude. In order that law may have obligatory power, it is necessary that it should be promulgated and brought to the notice of those to whom it applies. It must be in conformity with natural law. And finally, he concludes that human law does not operate over spiritual side of man, for which divine law is authoritative. It was in this way that Saint Thomas was able to defend the superiority of the Church as the repository of faith and at the same time argue that the state has its own legitimate realm of activity with which the Church need not interfere. He admits the necessity and usefulness of the state, but insists that Church is the highest institution. It's not the rival of the state, but its completion and perfection. He illustrates the relationship of the state and the Church by comparing the state to the carpenter of the ship and the Church to pilot. It is the pilot that directs and regulates. This means that a secular ruler could properly perform his functions only in cooperation with and under the guidance of the Church. Thus, in the ultimate analysis, by demonstrating that faith and reason, being complementary, are linked in a higher unity, he once and for all liberated medieval thought from the apparent dualism. He was the foremost classical proponent of natural theology and the father of Thomism. His influence on Western thought is considerable, and much of modern philosophy was conceived in development or refutation of his ideas, particularly in the area of ethics, natural law, metaphysics, and political theory. We may conclude with the remarks of Dunning, who says that Saint Thomas is the channel through which the philosophy of Aristotle, Stoics, Cicero, the Roman imperial jurist, and Saint Augustine blended into a rounded whole were transmitted to modern times. And finally, it was in this way the politics and political speculation once again assumed importance as it had in the classical times. That's all for now. Thank you very much for being with me.